People are coming in. That's fine. I want to welcome you, Kurt. Kurt is from AgileLeanHouse. Kurt has been working with Cynefin for quite many years now, and is actually also incorporating Cynefin in his Scrum classes. Kurt, take us away.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and for the introduction. I'm always kind of worried when something has been announced as a master class. That is, I mean, I come from the western part of the country here, and we're not supposed to boast about things, so we try to keep a low tone on. But it's also the case, of course, that like when we do trainings in Scrum Master, and then quite frequently we get the criticism that, well, that's sort of a joke, isn't it? You can't be mastering anything in 2 days. So and I guess that is true. So take it with a pinch of salt. But what I can say is that I have spent a lot of time with Cynefin and with Dave Snowden, and think that I have a pretty good overview of his ideas, at least until recently, where I think I'm starting to lose track of where he's going. But we'll go there, and I'll try and give you some ideas about how we have found it applicable in a lot of situations. And I'll try and share the screen, and as you know, you can when you have when there's screen share going on, you can have a speaker view, and you can sort of decide how much of the real estate on the screen you are going to share or use for the screen share and for the speaker view. Here's a few slides that we want to step you through, and the thing I would like to start with is just, well, there's going to be these 3 sections here, and there is a bonus section in case this goes faster than I thought. Then we will add that bonus section on at the end of this. So it's about Cynefin in detail, how to use it in daily life, how to choose the right approaches to solving problems in the context. And of course, complexity can mean an awful lot of things. And people have used the word for I don't know how long, but in many different understandings. And the way we're going to use it here is adopted from Dave Snowden, and it means that's when we're in situations where we only have fragmented knowledge. Like here we have some pieces of the puzzle, but not all of them, but we have to act anyway. And that actually is a significant thing for a lot of the practical applications of this. So the word itself, as you can get a long explanation from Dave Snowden on, since he is Welsh, and never call him English if you meet him. That is considered an insult. And so apparently Cynefin means something like all the different things in our background and our upbringing and our genes, etc., that makes us who we are, but we can never fully understand it. All right, so that's the word. That's Cynefin. And to ease ourselves into this from another angle, let's just look at some of the problems we find in organizations, and to some extent, of course, also in our private lives. And a few quotes here. Well, here's one from Mark Twain, and he says, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble; it's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And here's our friend Bornstein, and he's an academic, which you can see on the bow tie, and he has a slightly more academic version of: the greatest obstacle to discovery is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. And then finally, the king of human error, Daniel Kahneman, who says in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, our comforting conviction that the world makes sense on a secure foundation, our almost unlimited ability to ignore our ignorance. Now that's a pretty depressive view of the human being, but unfortunately, the older you get to realize that's probably pretty close to the truth. And Dave Snowden, here he is in full color and everything, of course, has contributed to help us understand this. This is what Cynefin is about sense making sense of a world that inherently is not completely ordered. Now, his background is that he has a university degree as a theoretical physicist and a philosopher, an interesting combination. And he came out of university and discovered that, hey, nobody's employing philosophers these days. Actually, they haven't done that since the ancient Greeks. So you have to find something else to make a living on. And he became a project manager. Of all places, he went to IBM. And he grew up through the ranks, and he, being the maverick he is, he also got in trouble. But in the process, he developed this model, Cynefin, together with a couple of other folks. And at some point, he left IBM and was allowed to take the concept with him. So that's now sort of the foundation of his company, Cognitive Edge. And just to repeat very quickly, because we've already had that a good explanation before, but what he says is that we split the world up into two areas here to the right of the drawing, and these are ordered. There is a cause and effect relationship. And some things down here in the blue part where it's obvious. Any reasonable person can see what this is and what needs to be done. The way we attack these problems is sense, categorize, respond. We put all the things in little neat boxes, and for each of those we can have a checklist or best practice. And these are called obvious, at least until recently. But we'll go with the previous vocabulary until the very end here. So it's obvious what to do. Then there are other things, well, they're not that obvious, and that's why he calls them complicated, because there still is, we are convinced, we believe, or we know that there is a cause and effect relationship, there is an explanation to be had, but it's just not something we can get immediately. You either have to research or analyze. And maybe you say, well, I see this great big list of numbers, but I can't determine what that means until I've done a statistical analysis or frequency analysis or anything else, or plotted them on a graph so I can deduct some meaning. Or maybe you say, I know there is an expert in Los Angeles, and when he wakes up, I can call him and get an answer. So we know the knowledge is there, it's just harder to get. And we're very comfortable with these two domains because they are, that's what we are taught in school. And unfortunately, Snowden says, this is not all there is to say. There is something over here, and that's what he called complex. And that's the place where you only have fragmented knowledge. And because of that fragmented knowledge, and you have either you don't know how to get the knowledge, it might be there for all intents and purposes, but you just don't know it, or you haven't got the time to wait for it, then you have to build it yourself. And you do that by a variation of the scientific method called probe, sense, respond. You try things, you create hypotheses of what might work or what might be the solution, and you try to come up with experiments that will prove you either right or wrong. And of course, that being said, these are experiments, and by definition, when they're experiments, they don't always give the desired result. By the way, already now, let's post one of the very important things here that are problems in organizations, and that is, whereas management very often are very interested in innovation and experiments, they are less appreciative of experiments that don't give desired results. Unfortunately, that goes with the territory. You can't have experiments without sometimes getting results you didn't want. What we have here is emerging practice, a combination of something new and something we knew before. And quite frankly, that's most of our life when you come to think of it. There is one more, of course, and that's called chaos. And that's not what we talk most about, especially when we work in with the agile environment and talk about agility and Scrum and Lean and etc., that typically reflects sudden drops into chaos one way or another. And what we do down there is we act sense response. We act intuitively the best we can to see if we can stabilize things, get one foot back up in complex and start iterating more structurally. That's emergency handling, the firefighter, the emergency room at the hospital, etc. And those are the main 4 domains. And quite often, people think of this as Cynefin as a 4-domain model, which it isn't. It's a 5-domain model. And the 5 domains, the 5th domain is the one in the middle, sometimes illustrated until recently, most of the time like this, as sort of a black hole in the middle. That's disorder. That's where you are when you don't know where you are, or when you haven't thought about it. And what happens is that that's a dangerous place, because since you are out of context, you will probably choose the wrong tool to attack the problem. So when we are thrown into a totally new situation, you could actually argue that we are dropped into the black hole in the middle, and then we very quickly scramble in order to make sense of things so much that we at least can determine which of the 4 domains we're actually in. The traditional planning methods that we have been brought up with and taught based on Winslow Taylor's theories from 100 years ago, they belong over here to the right. They're not evil per se, but they work in the environment where knowledge is stable and predictable. Whereas the agile methodologies and Scrum were up here in the border territory between complex and complicated, where we iterate backwards and forwards, taking some of the complex, trying to get enough sense of it that we can push it across the border and actually into a sprint and do something about it and deliver results. So that's where that is. So when I use this in the Agile and Scrum training, I always bring this up on the wall very early in the morning and say, well, please remember, this is what we're dealing with. There are other pieces of work that may not fit up here. And in fact, there is a third one down here, the border between complex and chaos. And we'll get back to these border territories later on tonight. But here we have, for example, things like design thinking, where we have complete novelty. We release every constraint simply to see if we can come up with complete novel ideas. And finally, we have the little curly bit down at the bottom. That's called the zone of complacency. And we'll get back to that one later. Also a dangerous place where you can, in a crisis, you can drop from obvious into chaos head first. And as Snowden puts it, recovery is very, very expensive. So this is the standard model. We've seen that before. Lots of people have tried and illustrate it. This almost sends you directly into vertigo if you're looking at this one, but it'll be in the slide deck where people have tried to illustrate it. Other people have tried to make a 3-dimensional Cynefin, and it has some sense, but here's one example where people have tried to do that, but it hasn't really caught on, and I don't use it. I just show it here for those interested. From time to time, I'm working on a 3-dimensional model that I think might work, but be useful as an illustration. But this one, it's actually building too much into the model. So like in so many cases, more becomes less. And in this, there are now 24 words to relate to, which is just too much for us to go around and remember. So that's one thing. And Snowden's own version was always drawn like that. And he has now sort of added what he calls transitions, and I want to talk just a little bit about this. It's something that not typically is spoken nearly as much about, but part of the Cynefin model is also, I would say, almost a pattern language for how to deal with different transitions. So it's not just a static model. So what it says here with the blue and the green, for example, is that most good organizations, they oscillate between the complicated and the complex. That's the blue bit over to the right. The blue bit over here. So we get a challenge. A customer may ask us for something completely new, and we don't know what to do about it, and we experiment and we build up knowledge, and gradually we move over here, and now we know, and now we can really deal with it. To the left, we have exploration, and to the right, we have exploitation. Now, that's normally considered a bad word, but this is not exploiting child labor or anything like that. This is exploitation of knowledge, which is, I think, is okay. So, and then I'm sure sooner or later we get kicked back into complexity again by some other disturbing event, which might be actually a challenge, a technical challenge or something, but we keep going that way. And the green bit signifies here only very little do we move down to obvious. So for example, in our little company, we've said, okay, accounting, it's done this way. We're not going to discuss it. We'll just leave it like that. If we ever have to change, we'll let the old system die and we'll just start from scratch. But we're not constantly doing like retrospectives and trying to improve and trying to learn, and because we say, oh, that's a done deal. This works for us. And that's okay with a few things. So that's the green bit. The yellow bit is one that he typically talks about, how you can get into a situation where the experts, up in the complicated domain, that's the home turf of the experts. And they can either get so entrenched in their thinking that if you have too many of the same kind of experts together, they will just reinforce their convictions and they are not able to think differently. They get into groupthink and think in synchrony, and that can be dangerous. Or they might get paralyzed because their analytic methods don't work. And so from time to time in that situation, you might need to ruffle a few feathers. And that actually takes them sort of through the unknown, in the middle, into chaos, and say, well, anything goes now. Let's see what we can come up with, and then we move back to complex. And then hopefully we can renew our solution or our way of dealing with customers. The purple one is a very really okay move to take, and that is, so we operate when we realize we need new innovation. And how do you get innovation? You set people free. You give them freedom to think outside the box, and you relax the constraints, to use Cynefin words. You relax the constraints and say to people, well, try whatever you want, more or less, but we still have a handle on it. We can pull back if it should go wild. But that's a way of not focusing on goals, but just focusing on ideas. And it's a very different way of working. That's, as I said before, we find something like design thinking down there. And then again, out of that come some new things back in the complex and can be worked on again. And that's sort of the dynamics of Cynefin. Snowden called them these that are the dynamics, but he is also, he thinks it makes perfect sense, but unfortunately, the rest of us are not as clever as he is, so we have a difficulty understanding what he actually means by the dynamics. But these are the movements where you try to shift your perspective. One of the things that have made Cynefin really popular is an article from years and years ago called The Leader's Framework for Decision Making. there's a lot here, but I'm not going to read all this stuff, but I'm going to give you a link, and I'll put it in the chat once we have the break here. I forgot to have it ready for that, but you can go and get it at HBR. It's still out there, and this gives sort of a table. Say, how can you react in the different domains? So in each domain, what are the characteristics? What is it the leader should do? What are the dangers? And how can we respond to the dangers? And it gives us, in Snowden's term, some guidelines for requisite response. Now, he's an academic, so he likes fancy words. And requisite, of course, means appropriate in the current situation or in the context. And we'll get more into his fancy words later on, which for us non-native English speakers can be quite a challenge. But there you have it. So the complex is the most difficult, although it's the most common. It's very difficult to accept that people get time to probe, sense, respond. As a leader or a manager, you have a tendency to become impatient and fall back and just tell them what to do. For God's sake, get on with it. Do this, do that. And then we've killed the spirit of the moment. We've killed the complexity approach, and we've forced it. That's the biggest danger, and the only one I'm going to talk about here. I encourage you, if you're interested in, to read the article, because it's quite good. What you do as a leader when you're in the complex and you just, and I've just had one of those situations in our little company, because there was a technical problem and I just I couldn't understand, why don't they just solve it? Why do we have to wait so long? And I don't dare to sell this stuff because I'm not sure it works, and why don't you get on with it? Now, finally, it's done. As a leader, you have to be aggressively patient, if you can use that term, because you have to be patient. You cannot predict in the complex domain. And falling back to command and control is the biggest danger. Here's the link. I'll make sure you get it in the chat, and then you can go and do your thing with it. Which domain are we in? So we have different things. During our training, we've used different ways of, and here's an example. We ask people, so what do you think this is? Mail campaign to customers that have purchased a specific product, and people have voted for, well, it's in between obvious and complicated. And that's one way of doing it. And maybe here's a new agreement for corporate account, and here's revenue profit graphs, and here's a mobile app for independent truck and courier drive. This is for a specific company. We use this actually, and people were trying to see how their application in their environment might fit into this domain. As you can see, it has something to do with petrol. So some of you might guess what company it is. Anyway, this is one way of doing it, but we can actually do an exercise on this. So the exercise is now, it requires you to jump into Google Presentation, where you can move around little virtual Post-it notes, and I'll just bring it up here and show you what it is you're going to see when you jump in there. So in this document, which is and everyone goes to the slide with their breakout room number. So so here we have a bunch of situations and jobs to do, and we have like the Cynefin diagram, and here you have to imagine that some people have already tried to put something in there. It's probably wrong, but try and go through it in your breakout rooms and discuss, where do you think these ones fit? Put them in, move them into the right domain. And the more you think they are obviously inobvious, you pull them down to the obvious corner. And the more you think, well, clearly they are complicated, nobody else can have any other opinion about it, you move them up to that corner. I hope this makes sense. We don't have an awful lot of time to coach everybody in here, but go to your slides and try and move them. And down at the bottom of this slide deck, there is just a reminder. If you don't have the handy, then slide 25 is just a reminder of what is the terminology here.
Thank you, Kurt. And Torsten has posted the link.
Yes.
Kurt, take us away.
I'd like to just stop up and ask you if I mean, was it possible in your groups? Anybody has any comments on trying to separate those work items into the different domains?
Yeah, I think the one thing sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, the one thing what became very obvious to me is the amount of assumptions that we need to make in order to categorize some of these things, right?
Yeah.
So I think they seem pretty simple and easy to kind of put into it, and in order to feel comfortable you're categorizing in that area, you make a bunch of assumptions in order to categorize it there. So that was pretty interesting to kind of see that was coming out of our discussion.
Yeah. That was also happening in our group. So at first it seems very obvious, but then say, okay, but what's the context of this problem? Is it is it an established company, or is it new? And that makes a lot of difference where you put the items. So that's something I think we realized while doing this exercise.
Let me just say also that if you find these slides here with simple ones you just played with, if you find them useful and would like to use them, then just make a copy of the Google slide, which you can, of course, and then you can take it away yourself and use it. But there was a comment also, I think, who was that? Mikkel, you had a comment, didn't you? Maybe not.
Yeah, it was quite similar. That on the surface of things, it could be sort of simple to categorize them, but I mean, even with a very modest amount of imagination, something that was obvious from the get-go can become really complex or even chaotic.
I know we're heading up for a break here, and after the break, we'll head into the territory of talking about how to build the model together in an organization, in a group, or whatever setting it is you are applying it, and some ideas about the application of it. What can it be used for in practical terms? So that's going to be the next topic. But any more comments before Liza forcefully kicks us off to a break? There's Peter. Did you?
Oh.
No, my cake is ended now.
Paul?
Almost.
Yeah. Did somebody else want to go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay. No, what I was just going to observe, I think we had a very good group in our room, and I think what was very helpful was that we were able to make the decisions collectively, that we each had our first stab at what we thought it might be, and then we discussed it a little bit, and then we were able to sort it out. So I think that it demonstrated the benefit of working as a team to solve these problems, or at least to identify them.
Yep.
Super, thanks a lot.
Pia?
We will,
Pia
more questions?
Yes, I was just going to say there was kind of like a planning poker session. We all had to like agree on how it was either complex or obvious or chaotic, and always keeping in mind we don't really know what company we're dealing with here.
Right. I mean, this is a game. When you do it for real, you have context, and that is of course all important. But yeah, it is a planning poker game, and it does give you this method, and we'll show you a few more after the break, and it gives you some of the same things. It provokes people to get thinking and talking and sharing information. And that's probably one of the biggest benefits, like it is with planning poker. It's not the damn number you get out of it, but it's really the conversation. So
Now
and of course, if you have something that you see like complex, or someone in your company feels like complex, so you can help the person to get information and
yes,
make the information together from and so that it moves to another quadrant, or some complex to complicate, and from that to obvious, because complicated things, they can get obvious later.
mm-hmm.
And now I will kick you out to a short break. I will ask you to be back 10 to 8, so you will only have maybe 3 or 4 minutes, because you've been talking a lot, but we have a lot more that Kurt will share with us. So take a quick stretch your legs or get a cup of coffee and be back in 4 minutes. Thanks for being back in time. And I just got inspired by Pia when you said, hey, it's almost like playing planning poker. I just wanted to mention that actually Kurt's company, AgileLeanHouse, has made Cynefin cards, so we can play Cynefin, and there is a game description, Kurt says on his homepage, and it comes along with, you know, the normal planning poker card. So let me know if you want to have a link where you can order them. So that was a small commercial, but I just got inspired by you, Pia. Kurt?
Yeah.
Take us away.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, we there was a question here. Just a quick statement as well about when we use this in the training. When we do 2-day trainings like standard Scrum Master or Product Owner courses, I always ask at the end of the first day, okay, boys and girls, now, was there something today that you either were shocked by, or you said, well, I never expected that, and there are 2 things that comes up. Cynefin is the most frequent one. People say, well, that explained a lot. And I've had people say, well, that was actually at lunchtime. They said, well, I'm happy I took this course because just getting to know Cynefin was worth it. So that's at the top of the list. And the second one is what we try to teach people about estimating with uncertainty and how to use uncertainty in a very practical sense. And by the way, we couple that also. Now, we're not going to go into uncertainty tonight, but we use uncertainty in the estimation to nudge management, stakeholders, and customers who have a tendency to think we're down here in the obvious domain, and they think we're down here, and really we're not. But once they get this little acid drop of uncertainty all the time, then we can nudge them up to a better understanding. I'll jump away and share the screen again, and let's just see this one here. Hopefully it was correct this time. And we're going to, where are we and how to act? That's the topic now. Okay. And again, let's just start with some of Snowden's statements, and it relates to the domains, but it's in a way it's more general. He talks about how in the complex domain it's all about knowledge and relationship. The boys and girls that win in the complex territory are those that can create relationships and can share and build knowledge. And the one thing he says is knowledge can only be volunteered, it cannot be conscripted. You can't force it out of people. Even under torture, you can't be sure that they tell you the truth. They might still be lying. And so therefore, we can only volunteer. You have to work with people and volunteers. The other thing he says is we only know what we know when we need to know. Our brain is an unfortunate, I mean, it's a very powerful instrument, but it has some quirks. You can't ask anybody, what do you know about this subject? and they'll tell you a little bit. But when you come into a scenario or a situation or a context where the knowledge is needed, then our lazy brains wake up again, and here it comes. And that's, by the way, also what the estimation or the estimation poker or the planning poker does for us. The other thing, third thing he says is, when in real need, few people will hold their knowledge. So actually most of the people are willing to help. And that's what we need in the complex domain, because we only have bits and pieces of the puzzle. So, and most people will help. And so let's step up to the plate and ask for it. The next one is that failure, actually not achieving what you wanted, imprints learning more than success. Rather disappointing in a way, because of course it's uncomfortable to fail, but that's where you learn. The next one is the way we know things is not the way we report we know things. We construct a much nicer story about how we got to this decision than we actually did. And especially, and you can consult Daniel Kahneman if you don't believe me, but especially we are filtering out any doubt and uncertainty and construct a very convincing story about why we think this is what it is. Because we like confidence. And confidence is very often mistaken for competence. So that's the scary thing. And then he says at the last, we always know more than we can say, and we'll always say more than we can write down. And that's another challenge with working the agile way and working in complex. We have to accept that a lot of the common understanding we are building has to be done verbally, because we just don't have the time to write it down. And probably the world would have changed if we waited until we had it all written down. That's also very disturbing to management, that we in fact have to work with getting the common understanding on the backlog refinement meetings and planning meetings, and not writing it precisely down so that they'll hold up in court. But these are characteristics of the complex domain, and something we have to. So how can you work with it? We saw before how you can put them on the figure. Another one that we actually use most of the time, although we like our own cards, we don't necessarily, we have a software team as well, we don't necessarily use the cards all the time. But what we do is, when as I'm the product owner, I come up with a grand idea. I think, typically the developers don't think that, but so I asked them, do you know how to solve this item? Yes, they say, yeah, we've done that before. All right, then it's probably obvious. If they say no, I'll say, well, do you know where to find information about this, how to solve it? And they might say, yeah, if we go into that forum of Alfresco, a platform we use, there are clever people. They will probably answer it. They normally do. We think we can get the knowledge. All right, then it's complicated. We have to research. And probably we might take that backlog item, that story, that work item, that deliverable, and break off, sometimes called a spike, an investigation. Write another little piece of paper, say, we have to do an investigation here, so and so and so. And if they say, no, we don't know where to get the knowledge, I said, can you come up with experiments that will reveal how we should deal with this? And if they say yes, okay, then we're complex, and we start discussing how can we come up and design some experiments and some hypotheses that would verify or prove or disprove what we think. And if it's not, then we're clearly in chaos. And then then I ask them, I say, can you come up with a forceful action that might change the scenario so we can do something? And all right, if yes, we're there. If they also say, no, we don't know, then we are lost and clueless. We're in disorder. Now, why should we spend time on doing this? I see it mostly from the point, of course, it's helpful for the team, but it's very helpful as a method for the product owner to get to and understand his team and what is their cognitive status regarding this particular item. If I know that they think it's complex, I know I have to wait for experiments to be fulfilled before I can claim any solution. And that is extremely helpful to reach common understanding, and also to bridge the gap between the people who do the work and those we deliver to, the customers or the users or whatever. If the team thinks that there are a bit of two domains in there, like quite often they, I don't know if we can see it, if you play this card, it's a little bit of complex, a little bit of complicated. That's an indication that probably this story could be split in two. There's a complicated part which we could actually start working on, and there's the complex part which we need some experiments before we can do it. So that is very helpful. This is what we use most of the time. It's the simplest way, and as you know, the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, is always a good one to follow. If you want to go a bit further, here's a method that Dave Snowden recommends, and that is building up a line. Like, imagine that we had all those little virtual post-its we had before in a big stack, and one way of getting to your subjective and context sensitive understanding of this, and we use that as an exercise, is you ask people to arrange them in a line, the group that you are turning loose on this, arrange them in the line from the most unordered and unpredictable and least known to the most obvious and ordered and well known. And you put them on a line like this, on order in one way and order in the other way. Then we say, now take a green marker and place it so that everything to the left is more unordered than ordered. All right, they do that. Then place the blue marker so that the things to the left needs research, but the other things can just be started now. And finally, place the red marker so that we can identify where we have experiments. So you might end up with all your work or all the epics in a project or something on a line like this, and to the right, we have the most ordered things, and they're obvious. That's what we agreed on. Then between the blue and the green, they're complicated, and we need some analysis. Between the green and the red, they're complex. We need some experiments. And to the red, they're in chaos. We can't really do anything until we've changed something. That's a pretty fast way of doing it, and helpful. So if you get the slides, you can of course try it with your own groups. So that's how these domains come forward. And Snowden is very precise about saying data precedes the model. It is the data that drives the model, and it's people's perception of data that drives the model. His favorite method is what he calls the 4 points method. It's like that. It goes like this. You identify in your group a piece of work as problem you solved and said, we knew exactly how to solve it. There it is. And then something, this one, we don't know, but we're sure we can find the answer. These are the exemplars, the archetypes. And here's one where we can experiment, and we knew in hindsight how things worked after experimentation. And we didn't know, but because we did something very forceful, that saved the day. And then you're plotting, just putting up all your story or your work or your backlog items and positioning in relation to those four corners, and think, well, this one is actually closer to that one, and this should fit in here. And then you identify those midpoints, and you have a piece of red string, and you try to say, well, these are my obvious ones. They're actually, we know about it. And these are the complicated, and these are the complex, and these are the chaotic ones. And then we have a big bunch in the middle, and they are disorder. That's where we don't know where we are. And then you put your effort to see if you can clarify any of those and move them out, and see if you can reduce the amount that's in disorder. It's always dangerous to work with a lot of stuff in disorder. So that's the 4-point method, which you also can use in a work group. Takes longer time, takes a lot of space, takes more preparation, but it is the one with the, I would say, have the highest concentration of cognition, that gives people the most insight. So when you identify that something is in a complicated domain, you might want to write a special story or requirement for that, for investigation and research. And here's a proposal. Here's what you can do, a template, if you will. An ID, a title, the theme that it fits into, the description of what you want to investigate. And then the next segment on the form is, what's the evidence that this actually will work, that these experts actually know something about it? Where's the evidence for that? Where's the evidence that this kind of research will give a desired result? And then what methods are we going to use? What's the justification? And who are what's the evidence that research and experts will solve our problem? That was number 2, number from the top. Then what methods is it, and what experts are they? How long it's going to take, when we're going to see a result, who's going to review it? And so that's sort of okay, here's the job description for investigating some complicated stuff. Now for complex, it's slightly more complex, surprisingly. But again, a proposal. So here's what we're dealing with. Give it a title. Describe the action or the experiment. Why is this coherent? Again, a Snowden word. Coherent means, why is this consistent with the facts we do know? I mean, remember, we only know partial facts or fragment, but we can't come up with an experiment that contradicts the things we actually know. That's a clear sign of insanity. So we're not going to go there. So why is this coherent? I mean, an argument for that. This is coherent because this fits the things we do know. How will I detect if this becomes successful? And if it becomes successful, how can I amplify the positive results of it? You may not know yet, but sometimes you do know, and it's good to put it out. And then the reverse, of course, how will I identify that this experiment starts to go haywire and deliver undesirable results? And if that happens, how can I stop it? Or how can I counter it, dampen the negative effects of what I've just done? The nasty thing about the complex domain is that what you do is irreversible. You cannot undo things in the complex domain. Once you've decided to take your eggs and your oil and your salt and your pepper and make mayonnaise, it's very, very hard to split it up into eggs and oil again. And so therefore, we need to, when we start doing something, it might have side effects we don't want, and then how can we dampen it? And the last ones are then what Snowden calls oblique, and that is, are we really after a side effect here? Is it a side effect we're looking for? And the other term he uses, which confuses me a little bit, but that's because it means something different in Danish, naive. He says, is this a naive? You need to come up with some naive experiments. Naive in this case means, I know from another domain that it has worked. I wonder why. I wonder if this would work in this domain. And that's a long story, which we won't go there. And don't worry too much about it. I just want to give you those templates here so that there is a way to work with these things in your projects or your developments or your whatever work it is you're doing. And then we're heading into another exercise here. I just want to introduce you to Mortensen and his hotel in Malmö. And there is actually a Hotel Mortensen. I think it's owned by somebody else now. And Arne will know because he lives in the neighborhood. But here is Mortensen, and not to worry too much about the data here, but we use him as an example in all our trainings and our exercises. It's a fairly neutral ground. Everybody has some idea about hotels and what to do there and have experiences, so we can sort of relate to it. Now, what I want to do now is I want to give you 3 wicked challenges for Mortensen. So a wicked challenge, like a wicked problem, is one where you can't make everybody happy. And that's typically a sign of complexity also. So the first challenge, and you can read out, but this is in your groups in a moment. The first challenge is Mortensen's head chef has just left. He emigrated to Australia. He's gone. He has an important function coming up in 6 weeks. He has 5 serious applicants for the position. He has a second chef who is second in command. He's not really sure whether he wants to apply. And Mortensen is not sure why he's not sure. Mortensen's hotel has a number of very popular Swedish dishes on the menu. Köttbullar, for example. And the Swedish are very picky about this and very conservative, that you don't mess with our recipes. So he's very concerned about it. The lady in charge of the reception is normally not referred to as easygoing, to put it politely. He can't afford to headhunt. There's 8 people in the kitchen staff, an additional 7. What are we going to suggest him to do? And the other challenge is that he's got a big order for an event. Never done it before. There'll be 450 people. They've only handled 150. Their kitchen can handle it, but they can't handle it in the City Hall kitchen, which is too small. There's about 3 kilometers between them. They have to arrange also video and sound for that event, and they've never done that before. They have to find a supplier. There's only 1.5 hours to prepare the room for dinner after the last event. And challenge number 3 is he has to renovate 8 rooms in one end of the 3rd floor due to a broken water pipe. It's about 3 weeks. He's very concerned about not being too much of a bother for other guests, and he don't want to close down because after Corona, cash flow is king. There's only access to the 3rd floor through the main stairs and elevator and fire escape. Electrical installation has to be renovated, which means you have to take out power from time to time. There are some important events coming up, but Mortensen's staff is very willing to help. Now, these are the 3 challenges, and I'd like you to jump into your rooms again and try and have a discussion about these wicked challenges and say, can you come up with either 1 or 2, depending on how fast you are, 1 or 2 proposals for dear old Mortensen? How can we suggest him? What is the best thing he can do? Just pick one of those challenges, at least one experiment, that this would make sense. This would bring him closer to have a plan of action. Does that make sense to you all? Y'all, as they would say in the South, yeah? Okay, you all have a good time then when you jump into the room.
Just one practical thing, Kurt. I saw then that the 4 wicked challenges, they are in the back of the presentation if anybody need to refer to.
Yeah, that's
correct.
Good point. And again, they are copied over there. Let me just show them again. Jump up to that slide and show you what it is you're going to end up in. Come on, Google. So this is how it looks. You can write in all the yellow post-it spots, and at the end there is a little bit about Mortensen in case you forgot how he looks, and the challenges are here at the very end in case you need to go down to start looking at them and deciding which one to try and tackle. And just for the fun of it, try and see if you can come up with a proposal for an experiment or a hypothesis to verify.
Good. I'll push the button so that you are moved to the breakout room. I think we have everybody back again. So back to you, Kurt.
All right. Am I on? So how was that? I mean,
Very interesting.
Did it make sense to you to think in terms of experiments?
Yeah.
And anyone who came up with some real revolutionizing ideas?
Revolutionary for
Mortensen, so that he can get out of his fix.
He should hire me.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, you'll sort it out. All right.
5 minutes.
One of another time we did this, someone came up with that. Okay, this problem about renovation, and it's really a problem to have constructors walking up and down the main stairs, and they came up with saying that it probably, by having a very advanced lift on the outside, you can get access to that second floor, that third floor in a different way, and then that saves his day. And
or let the
surprising.
persons have some kind of dresses that are funnier than the usually.
Yeah. Yeah. So so I'm just looking at one of the slides now, slide number 5, and I think it's a very good. Some of you have picked it that when you say, well, about this chef here. Now, why did he leave? That's a good question. And why is the second one not really sure that he wants to take the job? And so there's dissatisfaction in the kitchen, and we have to see if we can solve it. Yeah. Start at that and have grasped it. And what I'm recommending you is, of course, to try and use it in practice in your projects. When you identify something the team says is complex, then try and do one of those. What talks a lot about, not only Snowden, because it's generally accepted, is that when you define an experiment or a hypothesis, please make sure that you define what your success criteria are. How would you interpret a success? Write it down, if preferably make it public. Everybody talks about it. Because there is this, what Kahneman called nasty cognitive bias, whereby once we've made it, we are extremely likely to think of it as a success. And that's called the fallacy of the sunken cost. And any developer who have been around more than 6 months know what this is about. Now I've invested so much time in this damn module here, it has to work now, and I invest more in it, even in the cases where I probably should scrap it and start again. So cognitive biases is something we are trying to counter all the time. And one of them here is around the experiment. Please make sure you define your success criteria up front before you start the experiment. Okay, any other comments, questions to this before we move on? Okay, doesn't seem like it. We will steam into sort of the last turn on the track here, and I'll share the screen again. Hopefully this is correct. Here we go. So to some of the more exotic things and some of the things that Snowden recently has introduced, let's talk a little bit about that. We have now what he has called liminal areas, and he's drawn it in different varieties. And here, so far, here's an example of the sort of dark yellow or brownish part. Liminal, another fancy Snowden word, is yeah, well, actually, as a non-English speaker, I'm not really sure what it means, but it's sort of in between, and it's on the borderline, and it's a little bit of both. And in Celtic mythology, there's a state between life and death that's called the liminal state. So that's probably where he got it from. So there's this territory between the complex and complicated, and actually should probably be drawn wider, because that's where Scrum really fits in, where we're trying to keep everything open and then sprint after sprint, shuffle something to the right, to the complicated, so that we can deal with it. And we are constantly juggling and balancing early value exploitation with trying to find better solution, trying to find, as some people have called, the latest responsible moment to act. If any of you have read on Toyota, the Toyota way, their development practices is deeply rooted in the complex domain, where they try to find the latest responsible moment to make a strategic decision. Not so late that it becomes a problem, and not so early that it limits their options irrationally. If you are outside that liminal area into deep yellow complex territory, your line of attack is run multiple parallel experiments to see if you can gain the knowledge as fast as possible. It's very counterintuitive to what many developers think, and certainly to what many managers think. The immediate approach would be, okay, Paul Norton, you'll take that and you'll do the experiments, and then you'll come back and report how it comes. But actually, it's much more rational to have several people and several small groups, perhaps 2 and 2. There's a good case to be made for doing this 2 and 2, just like in pair programming, to do the experiments and very, very quickly try and see if we can corner different hypotheses. So in deep yellow territory, the complex, the strategy is multiple parallel experiments and see which one works and we could probably bring into action. Then there's another liminal border territory between chaos and complex. In the earlier writings, it was often referred to as the edge of chaos. Or Snowden sometimes referred to that when you release all the constraints and then you let people go pretty wild with innovation, you sort of take a shallow dive into chaos. But not more than, it's like letting the kids run out on the beach, but you still have this dog leash on them so you can roll them in. If it's a toddler, you would want to be able to roll him in because he doesn't know where the dangers are. The edge of chaos, you're releasing the constraints, but you're still able to pull back, sort of, as I said before, design thinking. And these are called the liminal areas. And the dynamics we already talked a little bit about, that deliberate managed innovation, the shallow dive into chaos, you're deliberately dipping your toes in chaos by releasing all the constraints. And also, the other one that you might want to look at it is, as I said before, from the complicated, breaking entrenched expert thinking by more or less they have become too settled and too comfy, and you have to throw them out in deep waters to force them to think alternatively. So and that one is takes you through an unpleasant and a dangerous place, by the way, going through disorder, where you're not really sure when you're going to disorder where you're going to come out. And so you don't want to do it too often. And then the final one, we talked about the little curly bit down at the bottom that's called the edge, that's called the zone of complacency. And it's sort of an odd thing, but what Snowden means with it is that if you overdo your categorization and your structuring of things and you're putting things on checklists and best practices, what happens is you move close to the edge between chaos and obvious, and people get focused on rules. Clearly, because the organization sends out all the messages every day, every single day. What is important is to keep the rules here. All right, I keep the rules. I want to stay out in trouble. I want to keep my own ass free. So I keep the rules, and the focus becomes on the rules, and we're focusing on the rules and we're following the rules even when they are bonkers. And so that in a crisis where things change rapidly can kick us over the edge and head first down into chaos. And as Snowden says recovery is very, very expensive. And if you need an example, the typical one that everybody quotes is Nokia, who was in that, we rule the world, we know how to deal with mobile, we've got it sorted out, we know exactly how it is, nobody can touch us here. 6 months later, they were down in chaos and said, where the hell did the iPhone come from? And the scary thing is that they actually ignored it. They did see it, but they ignored it and said, ah, Steve Jobs, what does he know? He's made a little iPod. He doesn't know anything about mobile. And you can find other examples. Kodak lost completely the game of digital cameras. Polaroid, other companies who got so settled in their ways and so structured and so protective of what they are doing today that they lost it in a change. These are some of the things that Snowden also touches on. In the latest version, he's for whatever reason, he's now changed the terminology. So this is the latest drawing that he has published. And as you can see, there's a few changes in there. The liminal areas are now drawn like this, and they are as on purpose drawn that the liminal area between complex and chaos is closed, because this is this on purpose shallow dive into chaos. It's a closed thing, whereas it's open-ended up between complex and complicated, trying to illustrate that you can be there for a long time, and it's a place where you can actually be, and that's where, for example, Scrum fits nicely in. The liminal area also crosses through the center and a little bit into complicated, and it's sort of where you move into the A. Let's just see here what it means. He's given it some new names. Clear has replaced obvious. I don't think for any good reason, apart from now we have 4 C's instead of. To me, as a non-English speaker, a native speaker, yeah, obvious and clear to me means approximately the same. So I don't, and emergent has been replaced with a real Snowden word, exceptive, which I have no clue what means, apart from in sort of evolutionary biology, where it means one feature that is being developed and actually seems to be able to be used for something else. And that's, in a way, of course, that makes sense. It's just a very odd word to have to try and teach people outside academic circles in English-speaking countries. But what it means is, of course, in the complex, you are constantly looking for maybe an inspiration, maybe something that worked in another domain, and you think, well, it could actually work here. So it's not that it doesn't make sense, it's just hard words to understand. And then it's not called disorder more, it's called confused. So the C in the middle is now confused. So we have 5 C's. Apparently that's nice, but again, confused and disorder, more or less the same. And then finally his blow that to us non-English speakers, the A in the middle means aporetic. This is the green part of confused. And I bet you most of you don't know what that means, but I don't know what it means. I've tried to research it, but apparently you have to read Socrates to understand it. But it's something about creating a crisis, creating a paradox, on purpose creating a tension that will be relieved, and you end up in complex again. I've sat through some webinars on this, but sorry to say I don't get it yet. So I can't really give it to you, apart from the fact that when you move through the confused phase, you sometimes do it deliberately in order to, through attention, create new ideas. It's sort of another way of creating ideas, and I think I'll leave it by that.
Never waste a good crisis, I guess.
Sorry?
Never waste a good crisis, I guess.
Yeah. That's actually that's a good idea. Yeah, but sometimes it means something different. A good crisis means there's a sudden drop into chaos. Never miss a good opportunity to seize power.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've come to the end of what I thought to say. I've still got the bonus part about sudden drops into chaos that we could pull into, but I promised Liza that we have room for questions and answers and something. So I'll let Liza take it from here.
Right, and it's just in case some of you have questions, because there are no questions in the chat. But if you have, we have about maybe 10-15 minutes. You may want to choose to hear more from Kurt. How do we do this the best way?
Maybe I have a question.
Yes,
yeah.
Who's that?
Maybe it's a little hard to find words, but I'm looking for, can you give me an indication of how much time I should spend with my team doing these exercises before we really get to see the value? That makes sense?
To spend time on what? I missed that part.
Yeah, so I definitely see a lot of benefit if my team would be more conscious of the complexity domains.
Yeah.
I'm just figuring out how much time do you have to spend to really reap the benefits.
My experience is actually you don't have to spend very much time. You have to introduce the concept and they have to understand what we mean by it. And for me, it's enough for them to understand that we're talking about, yes, we know how to do it. No, we don't know yet, but we know where to get the knowledge. Or number three, no, we think we need to experiment. And that's actually the most important part, to get the hang of what do we need to experiment. Because analysis they're used to doing, but experiments are somewhat difficult. And I like to use just the very first, the simple one that I introduced. As much as I like our cards here, actually the simple question: do you know how to do it? Do you know where to find the knowledge? Do you have an experiment? That's I think will give you most of the value.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
But I would also say it actually adds value to your communication with the stakeholders, that they gradually get used to the idea that there is complexity here. And this is something you got from the team directly. It's not just your opinion, it's actually the team that says we need to experiment here. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
So I have a question in terms of wicked problems in general. And if, like, you know, that hotel manager has many wicked problems that he has to deal with, how would he prioritize as to which wicked problem to go and deal with first? Because that's like comparing wicked problems against each other. But what have you come across in terms of handling that situation?
I would say that when you have the wicked problems, you try to see and establish an order of them. I mean, he has to come up with some sort of an order. And what is that based on? Well, some of it could be urgency. Like you are familiar with perhaps the concept of cost of delay. If I delay this decision, what's it going to cost me? It may cost me a fortune because I have to cancel a huge event. Or it may be, oh, this is only a linear cost. So that's certainly one way. What are the consequences? Are there any of these that have dire consequences? I'm breaking the law, I'm getting a contract cancelled, people were going to leave, or whatever it is. And then try to attack them from then on. And then perhaps line them up with, like, these are the things I want to achieve. And what do I have in terms of strategy, like a matrix? And these strategies, that's called impact estimation, to try and see the impact on the different problems I'm dealing with, could give him some clarity of where to start. But it can never be a mechanical process, because unfortunately it is complex. So to try and just make a spreadsheet and a sorting order would force it down into obvious, and it's very, very likely to go haywire.
Yeah, brainstorm a little and perhaps let 3 people, one with each problem.
Yeah.
That you can control anyway, but and be inside each one anytime.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay. All right.
I have a comment also, and that is that sometimes there is some a kind of a personal version of complex. Maybe a problem is really complicated. That means you can hire an expert that can solve it after some analysis. But if you don't know that expert, or it's maybe a new knowledge area, and you perhaps don't know if you can get an expert, then you are sort of pushed into the complex domain and have to experiment. And then perhaps afterwards, after some time of experimentation and research, you find out that there's actually an expert down the road. But if you didn't know it, you would be in the complex domain.
Absolutely, it's highly subjective. It's your team, or if you work alone, it's yourself. It's your point of view that matters. All right.
So in my experience, especially management love to push complex problems into the complex or even simple domain. They want to have a model or a standard approach to counter this kind of problems and have unrealistic expectations of the results of this. Do you have experience to help management or other stakeholders see that will not solve the complex problems?
Yeah, but it's definitely always an uphill battle, because it goes against the grain of what management is about, or especially if it's a hierarchical management is about. It's about predictability and compliance, and so this seems very scary for them. The best example I have is where we introduced complexity and the accompanying estimation of uncertainty in a bank, and they came back 6 months later and said it had hugely changed the way they worked, because management and stakeholders were exposed on a regular basis to little asset drops of uncertainty, but the team says this is uncertain. They don't know. It could be this, it could be that. And the other thing was that they were confronted with the language of complexity in sprint reviews and other reporting sessions, and the team, for example, says, well, this is like we all have each our little set of the puzzle, but only when we are together in the team can we bring them together and perhaps understand what the picture is, what the image in the puzzle is really about.
Thank you.
So, but it's always an uphill battle.
Yeah.
I have a question about when will you establish this kind of mapping Cynefin? Is that when you do the user story mapping, and then you establish this Cynefin overview and then update it regularly every sprint?
Yeah, I consider it as a part of the. It's another property of a certain specification, a user story, an epic, or whatever. Like the estimation of effort. This is another angle, another dimension, and I would perhaps, I mean, depending on how much time I have, I would like to start even when the first sort of project kickoff, to have the team identify some of the big chunks of complexity. So very early on, we know where the big chunks of experimentation is going to be. But I include it as a regular discipline on the backlog refinement meetings. So just like talking about, okay, how big is it now? Now that we've discovered these acceptance criteria, what do we think now? What's the effort? And then I always correlate the uncertainty in the effort estimate with the complexity, and sometimes confront the team and say, well, how could you say this is obvious? And then you have a huge uncertainty.
Yeah.
And at the very least, we get a good dialogue about why it is. And sometimes there is a reason, but most of the time we say, oh, yeah, well, maybe, yeah, we forgot. It is actually not obvious. It's, yeah. Or we use it for splitting. Again, what I said before, if the team says, well, it's a little bit of both, well, then let's try and split it and see if we can get a more robust understanding by splitting the story into a complicated and a complex part and deal with them individually.
A quick comment, not so much a question. But what I see in many organizations, large and small, but especially in large organizations, is that there is a constant hunt for best practices. Right?
Yeah.
But we need to remember to document our best practices and make sure that everybody follows the best practices for these things. And especially in large organizations, we are constantly in the complex domain or even chaotic. And I spend so much time trying to explain to people that you shouldn't expect to find best practices. What you can find is common practices. Here are some things that have been done once, twice, 3 times in this organization. There is no guarantee that it's going to work in this particular context in this organization. But people still seem to believe that there are magical best practices out there for complex things.
That is absolutely correct, and there needs to be a worldview change, and that's a whole nother webinar to discuss that, I think. But you are absolutely correct. This is what we can expect. So, Liza, do you still think I should steam on with it just very quickly?
Yeah, if you can, because we would like to have some feedback as well.
I would give you I'll give you a really sort of the short version, and the sudden drops into chaos when you realize this, that oh my God, I'm down here. Then what did you actually do then? What is there any? I of course refrain from using the word best practice here, but is there something? Is there a pattern to follow? Something that we can do? And what we may have been hit out of the blue and just thrown down there, like the Corona crisis or some other things. We had one of the platforms we're using in our technology stack all of a sudden just failed. A new release thrashed it, everything. Or we may, of course, have been in the zone of complacency. In Danish, the best translation I've ever heard from a guy, and some of you are Danes, so I'll just say it here, den selvfede zone. And if you entered into that one and being hit by a sudden change, you might have dropped into chaos, and there you are. And all of a sudden, this is our organization, down on the floor. What do we do? First of all, acknowledge the situation, declare emergency. This is an emergency. And we just like we did in the country here, when we closed down the country, and I accepted that as well as a citizen in the country, that our prime minister closed the country. This is an emergency. I let her have the authority. And what you will do is the suggestion is to form a transient crisis team, very small team of the very best people with the most experience and intuitive power of decision making that you trust as much as possible, and you say, okay guys, you deal with it, and you pull them out of whatever situation they're in, whatever project they're in, and you let them deal with this, and everybody else tries to cover up for them and do their job, but they're pulled out and they're giving fairly extreme authority. But their authority is to stabilize the situation, and that is to get something done that stabilizes. As Snowden puts it, when you drop into chaos, you will seek to stabilize very quickly, because chaos is always transient. Anyway, the world will stabilize if you don't do anything, probably to your disadvantage. So better get off your ass and do something. Stabilize, get a foot up in complex, and then start to rear. And then you decommission the crisis team formally and very visibly. This is what we're lacking in this country now, I think. But in an organization, here was a crisis, we dealt with it, these guys did what they should, we honor we thank them, we give them praise for what they've done, and we dismiss them formally, and they relinquish their authority. They are no longer actually in chaos. You have to accept command and control. If the ship is sinking, the captain has command and control. He has to have that, but you relinquish very, very quickly. And then you learn from the whole series of events. And actually, I think I'll probably stop here, because otherwise I'll take the rest of the time. There's a few more slides that elaborates on this, but it's an expansion of those last 5 bullet points. So the strategy for dealing with it is to be very aware of that this is chaos. Of course, an organization has to have a formal way of declaring emergency. They have to know who are the very, very experienced people that we're going to give this authority. And it's probably not the CEO. It could be, but it's definitely not the CFO, because this is not a financial problem typically that he can handle. But the best people, let them do the best, stabilize the green arrow, get back into complex where we can have more controlled experiments, and then decommission, because there's a problem with entering chaos. That is, people who get power all of a sudden might think, well, this is actually pretty nice. Why don't we just keep it going like this? Things work much better if I decide. Let's just keep this structure. This is actually quite nice. And it can be hard to get rid of them again. And that's why it has to be formally here. And then a parallel set of events to try and learn from it. This was obviously something we never thought could happen. What can we learn? Make also this a learning experience. I think I rest my case here, Liza.
Thank you, Kurt. Thanks very much. Really, really appreciate it. I'm sure I talk for everybody. Torsten is now sharing a sheet where we would like to have your feedback, your immediate feedback. We are in AgilityLab always interested in learning and improving these meetups. So, so please share your thoughts. I would like to ask Kurt, will you stay for a few minutes after?
Sure, I will.
Yeah, super.
I didn't put any actually in the slides here. I will do when I give you the slides so that you can get in contact with me if you want, but also connect with me on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Kurt B. Nielsen on LinkedIn. So, but obviously when I send out the PDF, I'll just make sure that the email and LinkedIn address is there.
Yeah.
If you want to continue the discussion one way or another.
Thank you, Torsten. Just wanted to appreciate everybody for providing feedback, and thanking everybody for taking the time to join us. It's really awesome. So thank you very much. We may even have more classes on Cynefin. Let's see about that. Stay tuned.